Where can you successfully market, sell, deliver service today? What geographic regions? We also need to be realistic about what company sizes you're going to be most successful with. What's the minimum size a company needs to be? And I'm not talking about kilowatts or megawatts here. I'm also not talking about square footage. What I'm talking about is if someone from your sales team went to prospecting database or some kind of platform like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, or you're running ads on LinkedIn Campaign Manager or using some other similar kind of database. What's the minimum size that a company needs to be to meet your minimums? And what's so large that you may not be able to successfully navigate that journey, their sales process, because the requirements are going to be so over the top relative to where you are today. Hello, all over the data center ecosystem. I am Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI and host of the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this week's show where I'll be tackling a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem, from operators like hyperscale, co-location, edge, modular, wholesale data center providers, as well as technology and facilities companies that work with data centers and data center operators, as well as construction and real estate related companies that work with data center related companies throughout the full ecosystem. And regardless of where you sit on a go-to-market team, maybe you work in sales or marketing or account management or channel partnerships or product, or perhaps you're the orchestra conductor, the executive sponsor, the leader who brings everything together and aligns everyone to make sure that they are on the same page. But either way, regardless of what kind of company you work for within the data center industry, and regardless of what you do, where you sit, you are in the right place if you are looking to elevate your role, your team's impact, and your company's impact throughout the entire data center ecosystem. If this is the first time you are joining us for one of these live streams, please let us know in the comments where you're watching us from and what you do in the data center industry. And make sure to smash the like button as well. What is on the agenda for this week? Well, I'll be looking at how to sell co-location and other data center infrastructure. Then we'll turn our attention to how to earn a data center client's trust. After that, we'll shift our attention to how to create a go-to-market, a GTM strategy for energy storage with sodium-ion battery technology. After that, we'll take a quick break for a message from our sponsor. And when we come back, we'll look at how a sustainable data center solution provider can avoid spam filters when doing outbound lead generation. Next, we'll look at how to close data center sales with ICT, infrastructure, communications, and technology clients. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream, we'll look at how to sell green data centers to banking, healthcare, manufacturing, and telecommunications clients. So we've got a pretty packed agenda to make sure that you keep tabs about upcoming live virtual events like this, as well as webinars and new educational resources and podcasts. Make sure you subscribe to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox each Sunday. You can subscribe directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So let's jump right in. First question for this week is, how does a co-location and data center infrastructure company increase sales? How do we sell co-location and other data center infrastructure? It's an awesome question and a fantastic place to start. And when it comes to selling colo, when it comes to selling other kinds of data center infrastructure, we need to know where you've been successful in the past. So the first thing that we're going to do is go to your website and look at your case studies page. We're going to look at your logos. We're going to look in your CRM, your customer relationship management system, and see where you've been most successful. And we're looking for commonalities among where you've been most successful. Do they tend to be located in the same geographic region? In other words, does your company do best at selling co-location and data center infrastructure when clients are in a closely clustered area? With local single or 2 or 3 location co-location operators, that's often the case. They often do well with companies that have looked at the large national and global data center operators in the past and come to the conclusion that they'd rather prefer a local alternative. And then there's a whole Goldilocks in between there with companies that have 5, 10, 20 facilities that wouldn't quite consider themselves national or global, but fill that place in between the large REITs, the large real estate investment trusts, and the small independently owned co-location operator. So we need to know geographically where you do best. And for a lot of companies that sell co-location and data center infrastructure, they almost need two different kinds of playbooks. They need a playbook for selling locally, as you're largely going to want to focus on getting as many of the right prospects and clients to visit you in person and tour your facility. So educational events, lunch and learns, breakfast seminars, symposias, anything that you can do that educates and builds trust with the right prospects and clients in your facility where you can bolt on a tour to that. Fantastic stuff. Then there's the virtual, the long distance, the remote kind of sales process that can be relevant even to single location co-location operators. And with that kind of process, we're virtualizing everything. So things like search engine optimization, search engine marketing, social media marketing, paid and social, outbound, webinars, live streams, virtual tours, those become incredibly important. But especially for smaller companies that are resource constrained, even for larger companies, a lot of times that local versus national or global playbook where people can drive to you within a half hour to an hour versus cannot drive to you within a half hour to an hour is a really interesting demarc point to think of when it comes to your sales and marketing and your go-to-market strategy for co-location and selling data center infrastructure. So first up in the ideal client profile, we need to know where they're located. Second, we need to know where you win best in terms of your client's company size, their headcount. You could back into revenue as well, but if you're going to use a tool like LinkedIn, sooner or later, you're going to end up normalizing based on the number of employees, the number of headcount, because LinkedIn Sales Navigator, LinkedIn Campaign Manager all run on a number of employee range. So is 1 to 10 employees usually too small that they can't afford your minimums? Is 1,000 plus employees, 5,000 plus employees, 10,000 plus employees? Where does it fall off where your company may be so outmatched on a huge enterprise client that the likelihood of being successful just really isn't your sweet spot? So let's get really specific on your ideal client profile, not only geographically where your best clients are, but how big they are, how small they are, what size they are, what's Goldilocks for you, what's just big enough but not so large. And for a lot of independently owned co-location providers, maybe it's 10 to 500 employees. For national co-location operators and digital infrastructure companies, maybe it's 50 to 5,000, or maybe it's 50 plus, and there is no limit on how big an enterprise client can actually be. But these are all things that you're going to figure out individually for your own company. If you have a product manager, they probably spend a ton of time on this. If you have a technical co-founder or chief product officer / chief marketing officer, they of course spend a lot of time on figuring out the size range that you target, because this directly impacts, we'll talk about in a moment, but industry is another big factor when it comes to selling co-location and selling data center infrastructure. What business model are they in? What vertical market? What industry? Why is that a big issue? Is because of the intersection with geography plus industry. A lot of times certification and compliance issues come up, especially if you're selling like into healthcare or financial services. So we definitely want to take that into account in your ideal client profile as well. So with your ICP, your ideal client profile, we've talked about geography, we've talked about company size, we've talked about industry match, vertical match. Once you have those nailed down, you're in a good position to go build a target account list that'll power account-based marketing, account-based selling, targeted outbound, targeted ads, all of the above. But once you have your ideal client profile documented, you should be able to build out a list of a couple dozen, a couple hundred, maybe even a couple thousand companies that you would love to have as future clients for your company's co-location and data center infrastructure. So that's what's going on at the company level. But we also need to recognize that you're likely in a hyper-competitive market where your prospects and clients have a lot of choices when it comes to co-location and data center infrastructure. So we really need to nail relevance, and we need to lean into the idea that most of your best prospects and clients now want a self-driven buyer's journey. What does that mean? They're doing most of their homework before you ever get to meet them face-to-face or virtually. And this is a big difference compared to as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. If we were having this conversation 10 years ago, it was very common that most prospects and clients for colocation and data center infrastructure did about half of the buyer's journey on their own, but about half of the sales cycle on their own before they were ready to meet with someone from your sales team. Add in 10 years of digital transformation, a lot of baby boomers retiring and more millennials and Gen Z getting elevated into decision-making roles, Gen X becoming a bigger factor, plus a couple of years with millions of people working at home at the beginning of the 2020s. And we've ended up in this place now where the self-driven buyer's journey, where people just do a ton of research on their own before they get to you, is now the predominant buyer's journey. Gartner found 83% of a typical buyer's journey, researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing, now happens before vendor contact, before sales contact. In other words, most of the 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision are happening without you in the room. And for a lot of companies that sell colo and data center infrastructure, when you're not in the room and you're trying to run the same playbook that you've been running for the last 10 years, it can be really, really frustrating. Because a lot of the decisions that your best prospects and clients are making about what they're going to prioritize are happening without your input. But it doesn't have to be that way. There is a better way to approach this. But it first comes down to, now that we know the companies that we want to be selling colo and data center infrastructure to, we need to know who the stakeholders are that are on that decision committee. And most importantly, we need to know what they care about. So once you have your ideal client profile nailed, we need to be able to identify the buyer personas that matter most. A buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of an ideal client that you want to market and sell to based on actual research and some select educated speculation. It can't be all speculation. Sure, you can talk with your coworkers and team members and data center veterans who've been with your company for decades or in this industry for decades, and they may have some of the answers, but the actual research is incredibly important. So I would say if you're going to do internal interviews as part of your buyer persona research, weigh that about 20 or 25% of the equation. 70, 75, 80% of the input needs to come from talking with actual people that fit into that stakeholder category. This can be face-to-face interviews, it can be Zoom interviews, it can be surveys, it can be looking at their contact record, it can be studying their LinkedIn profiles. There's a lot of ways to get that information, but it's critical that we get it from their own mouths, their own words. Not what we think those words are going to be, but what those words actually are. Because at the absolute minimum, before we can go about educating and building trust and get invited in as an educator, as a consultant, as a trusted advisor, as a subject matter expert, perhaps even a thought leader, on their side of the table in that first 83% of the buyer's journey, we need really strong consensus on who the buyer personas are, who we're going to prioritize, who's the primary buyer persona, who's the secondary buyer persona, who has the most influence on the purchase decision, who has the second most influence on the purchase decision. And then with each of those categories, what are their biggest goals that they need to figure out that are part of their job responsibilities individually and part of their team's responsibilities? What's the consensus on that buyer persona's goals? And what is driving them nuts? What's frustrating the heck out of them? What's causing them to lose sleep? What's causing their vacations to get compromised? What is causing premature hair loss and causing stomach ulcers? What is driving them totally freaking nuts? Once we have consensus on that, in their own words, their biggest goals and their biggest challenges, we can set about building a content strategy, an educational content strategy, and an educational event strategy that educates and builds trust with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so you and your client-facing team are seen as the definitive go-to experts in your space. Because that's where you have a unique opportunity to be in on as many of those 28 touch points between complete stranger and colo and data center infrastructure purchase decision as possible. And when you do that exceptionally well, you're nearly guaranteed to be on the short list. When you do that at a world-class level, In certain circumstances, your educational resources and your educational events can make such an amazing impact to getting multiple people from that decision-making committee on your side that by the time that company is at the decision stage of the buyer's journey and they're ready for vendor contact, many times you have completely neutralized the competition. In other words, you've won. You've won already because they've spent so much time with you. You've indoctrinated them so well about your way of seeing the world and navigating all of the options that are in front of them for colo and data center infrastructure that they've come to a very natural conclusion that there's no one else worth talking to. Gone is price sensitivity. Gone is having to compete on price. You've won. But in order to win, in order to sell colocation and data center infrastructure to today's modern buyers, there in most companies needs to be an executive level prioritization, a cultural change that says we're going to put the flag in the sand, we're going to draw a line here, and going forward, we want it so everyone in our designated geographic area and company sizes of this many employees in this kind of industry, they need to see our company as the definitive go-to experts about anything and everything having to do with co-location and data center infrastructure. And we're going to make the investments to make that happen. If there's people that are on the team that don't want to get on board with that, well, there's going to be some bigger decisions that need to be made. But going forward, if your company wants to sell co-location and other data center infrastructure effectively to today's modern buyers that are heavily influenced by the self-guided buyer's journey, it's important to show up where they are, not where you'd like them to be 10 years ago, but where they actually are today. And the better job that you can do at exuding insanely high levels of relevance and incredibly high levels of value, the more likely it is that you and your team are going to get invited into their side of the virtual table in the early part of the buyer's journey. And you're going to be able to dramatically impact how they research and navigate and compare the different options that are in front of them when it comes to anything and everything having to do with co-location and data center infrastructure. Next question up is, how do we earn a data center client's trust? How do we earn a data center client's trust? So what's critical with that is to understand your buyer personas, understand who you sell to exceptionally well, to have extreme empathy for what your prospects and clients are going through in their professional lives. So it starts by getting super specific about who the stakeholders are that you need to provide the most value to throughout their full life cycle. From leads to sales opportunities to new clients to initial value, intended value, extended value, retention, them becoming those new clients becoming so thrilled and ecstatic about what you provide that they essentially become an extension of your sales team by fueling positive digital word of mouth. So how do we earn a client's trust? Well, we need to recognize in today's modern self-guided buyer's journey, where people are more allergic than ever to spending time with salespeople, we need to think about repositioning and repackaging what it means to sell in the data center industry. People really don't need a salesperson to show up and read them what's on your website anymore. In fact, they may not even need to read it because in most cases, the companies that you compete against will have explainer videos on most of the pages on their websites. They don't even need to read it. Someone will read it to them. If they use a LLM, large language model like a ChatGPT or Perplexity or Copilot or Claude or something like that, or Gemini, again, they're more than likely not going to read it because there's actually audio on there that'll read it to them. So nobody needs your salesperson to show up and read slides to them or read the website anymore. They're going to do that largely on their own. The self-guided buyer's journey, what Gartner's found is like 83% of a typical journey is now over before sales contact, is happening. It's real. This isn't future. It's already happened and happening today. So we need to figure out, with that in mind, how do we earn a data center client's trust? It largely comes down to figuring out a way to make ourselves relevant again in the early and middle stages of the journey, in the awareness and the consideration stages of the journey. Because a lot of companies are not showing up at all in that first 83%. And they're hoping for a miracle in the final 17% when they've been largely absent from the stadium, from the game, from the whole process, the whole buyer's journey for the first 83% of the journey. So how do we get you in there for the first 83% of the journey? We need to understand who the prospects and clients actually are that matter most. So we need a lot of clarity at the company level of who we're selling to. That's your ideal client profile, knowing geographically where they're located, what company sizes they tend to be from, and are there certain industries or business models or verticals where you win best. Once we have that nailed down at the company level, now we need to look at the individual level. Who are the stakeholders that are typically involved in these kinds of projects? Who do you have our relationships with early on, in the middle, and later in the mature parts of the sales process and post-purchase? Once we have clarity on who that person is and who's the most important and who's the second most important category of stakeholders, we'll designate those as the primary and the secondary, perhaps even a tertiary buyer persona. And in each of those groups, in each of those segments, we need to understand what their biggest goals are and what their biggest challenges are. And then we need to figure out a way to take the smartest people inside of our own companies, our client-facing teams, and have them show up instead of being account executives or sales development reps or account managers. They need to show up as teachers and consultants and subject matter experts and trusted advisors. Some of the really seasoned members of your team may even show up as thought leaders, but even the most junior members of your team, perhaps folks that are relatively new in like a SDR, a sales development role, or a junior marketing role, or a junior account manager role. No one calls it junior, but like someone that's fairly entry level to your company, to your industry, they can still, after a couple of months, be a good tour guide, be a concierge of all your available expertise, subject matter experts, and thought leadership internally. So what do we do? Should you immediately go to your business card and your email signature and your LinkedIn profile and come up with better synonyms for the job titles you have today? Maybe. It's a mindset issue, though, because going forward, in order to educate and build trust with your most important prospects and clients, they need to see your client-facing team members more like Big Four consultants that are providing outrageously high levels of value throughout the full life cycle, throughout the buyer's journey, rather than their traditional transaction-focused roles. In other words, like the salesperson, the AE of the future needs to look a lot more like a Big Four consultant that works for like PwC or EY or KPMG or Deloitte or Accenture or Kyndryl or something like that. The account manager post-purchase needs to be even more advanced. They need to look like the MBA version, the Master's in Business Administration, or the PhD level, the doctoral level version of that kind of skill set and expertise. So this is going to change who is most valued in your company, who you hire going forward, the kind of professional development that you need to level up and invest in. And I see among pretty well-established data center operators, a lot of the seasoned sales professionals have already made the leap. In my conversations with sales leaders and CEOs of some of these companies over the last several months, I've found that the seasoned sales professionals in these roles have these computer labs at home. Their nights and weekends projects that are so elaborate and their level of technical expertise is so strong that most of them, if they weren't an account executive, if they weren't selling in the data center industry, next week, they could go hang out their shingle and be a moonlighting fractional CTO for small and medium-sized businesses in their local community. That's how strong their skills and expertise are. So in order for your sales team to truly differentiate themselves throughout the full buyer's journey and earn a seat at the table during that super important awareness and consideration stage, so that they can have an integral, instrumental role in shaping the purchase criteria that your prospects and clients use to evaluate all the alternatives that are in front of them, there really is a very important leveling up that needs to happen. And this is going to be contextual to who your buyer personas are and what your business model is. What kind of courses, what kind of certifications, what kind of professional development, credentialing needs to actually happen. But you want to make it so that your client-facing team is providing so much value to your prospects and clients that your prospects and clients actually want to spend time with them. If a big part of your sales process revolves around your SDRs and your AEs constantly bugging prospects to please take a meeting with me so I can come in and tell you about how wonderful we are, you're doing this. I don't want to say you're doing this wrong, but there's a much better way to approach this given today's self-driven buyer's journey. Because when you approach this the right way, the kind of unique insights that your client-facing team should be sharing that are unique to this kind of business in this kind of industry in that geographic region of that company size, in particular with that how that particular stakeholder navigates around this issue, it is outrageously valuable to that kind of buyer persona, to that kind of stakeholder. And in order to be able to deliver at that value, it's pattern recognition, it's muscle memory of working with several dozen, perhaps even several hundred kinds of companies over a period of time and noticing the trends and the patterns that, okay, when we're dealing with a CTO of a mid-market manufacturing company in the Midwestern United States or in the Nordics or in Singapore, wherever it is, we tend to see these same kind of issues come up over and over and over again with these CTOs. Is that something that you were facing? And their jaw drops like, how the heck did this person know what we're dealing with? Well, you know, because you've seen the patterns, because you see the exact same 2 or 3 big issues coming up with all the CTOs of the mid-sized manufacturing companies of that size in that particular geographic region. So you're able to deliver value more as a consultant than as a transaction-focused SDR or AE or account manager. And when you're able to do that, it is game-changing for being able to earn a data center client's trust. For most companies, these are some pretty major cultural changes. So in a lot of cases, if there are internal processes, if there's systems, if there's investments that are currently being made in favor of a sales and marketing playbook that really hasn't been updated over the last 10 years, this is a culture change that many times needs to start all the way up at the C-level. For a company with up to maybe a couple hundred employees, this is the kind of initiative that requires buy-in from like your CEO. I mean, above a few hundred employees, yeah, it's probably a chief commercial officer, or a chief revenue officer, or chief sales officer, chief marketing, chief product, something like that, that takes a similar kind of interest, and your company being seen as the definitive go-to experts of anything and everything of relevance to a CTO of a mid-sized manufacturing company with this many employees in this kind of region. But this is a big culture change, and it requires a different approach to hiring, reskilling, upskilling, cross-training, how your teams are built, how you interact with your prospects and clients. But if you're serious about going forward, having a very solid role of educating and building trust, of getting in front of the right people, in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context going forward so that you can earn a data center client's trust, this is incredibly important. Next question up. If you're getting good value from today's data center go-to-market sales and marketing Q&A live stream, make sure that you hit the like button and feel free to leave in the comments a question that you have that you would like us to address on an upcoming future episode of the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. So next question up is, how do we create a go-to-market strategy for energy storage with sodium-ion battery technology? So your company is in the business of energy storage using sodium-ion battery technology. How do you create a go-to-market strategy? So we first need to know historically what kinds of data center operators, what kind of enterprise data centers have been most successful with your energy storage sodium-ion battery technologies. If you're a brand new business, you're going to have to make some hypotheses. And if you're a brand new business, more than likely, you have a technical co-founder who's wearing the hat of chief product officer. Once your company is established, you will have someone that leads product and is constantly meeting with facilities managers and ESG managers and sustainability managers and whoever else weighs in on energy storage with sodium-ion battery technology. But we need to have an idea of where you can win. For an established company, there's probably some great clues about this sitting on your case studies page, sitting in your logos, sitting in your CRM, on your closed won deals where you've been most successful with your existing clients and them being thrilled, delighted, and becoming a huge source of positive digital word of mouth going forward. And among those most happy clients, we need to have an idea of where they're located. For a lot of companies that are just getting started, they launch in one particular geographic region, and then they eventually have aspirations to grow beyond that geographic region, and they look to establish international subsidiaries and hire international teams and capabilities. But we need to know first, when it comes to your energy storage and your sodium ion battery technology, where can you successfully market, sell, deliver, and service today? What geographic regions? We also need to be realistic about what company sizes you're going to be most successful with. What's the minimum size a company needs to be? And I'm not talking about kilowatts or megawatts here. I'm also not talking about square footage. What I'm talking about is if someone from your sales team went to a prospecting database or some kind of platform like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, or you're running ads on LinkedIn Campaign Manager or using some other similar kind of database, what's the minimum size that a company needs to be to meet your minimums for energy storage, sodium ion battery technology? And what's so large that you may not be able to successfully navigate that journey, their sales process, because the requirements are going to be so over the top relative to where you are today. So in terms of your ideal client profile, where geographically? Second, what company size? What's the minimum and maximum size where you feel comfortable marketing, selling, and servicing your energy storage? And then are there certain industries that are better suited than others, in a lot of cases because of compliance requirements that are unique to those particular industries, or energy storage requirements that are unique to those particular industries? So that helps you to figure out the ideal client profile, the ICP. From there, you can build a target account list to fuel your account-based selling, your account-based marketing for everything that you might do with like outbound marketing, outbound prospecting, as well as running ads specifically targeted to those companies. So on the second, so that's at the company level. Then within the companies, who are the people that matter most for energy storage? And a lot of the personas, a lot of the job roles, a lot of the commonalities will come down to company size, because we know, other things being equal, when you're selling to a smaller enterprise client with data centers or a smaller data center operator, you're going to have one person wearing a lot of different hats, taking on a lot of different roles. When you're selling to a huge data center operator, let's say you were selling to like Switch or Equinix or Digital Realty or something like that, you're going to have very, very, very granular, highly specialized roles that are also further segmented geographically within facilities management, which is more than likely where an energy storage conversation would be taking place. So defining the company size part and the geographic part within your ideal client profile will help to figure out how granular you need to be with your segmentation strategy in terms of the different kinds of stakeholders that you need to educate and build trust with. Let's say, to keep it relatively simple, you have identified two different kinds of decision makers, two different kinds of people that show up on the decision committee that you need to build trust with, that you need to educate. And in this particular case with energy storage, maybe it's a director of facilities, and perhaps it's a CFO or an ESG officer or a innovation officer or something like that. But either way, you've identified these two different roles, these two different kinds of buyer personas that are super important to your success with this particular client. Once you have that in mind, it's time to spend some time with each of those people and get really deep on understanding their biggest goals and their biggest challenges in their own words. Not what you think those words might be, but what their words actually are. So you really need to do some serious research around that and get them to articulate, when it comes to your category, how they navigate energy storage, how they prioritize energy storage, what are their biggest goals that are both specific to energy storage and adjacent to energy storage that they need to figure out in terms of their job responsibility and what their team is working on and what their company is working on, and what are their biggest challenges. What are the things that are driving them nuts, that are making them super frustrated, that they can't find answers to, that are taking away their work-life balance, taking away their ability to step away and recharge for a vacation or something like that once in a while, and are really, really causing huge, huge stresses in their professional and bleeding over even into their personal lives. So once you get consensus on that, then they're in their own words, and it's a lot easier to develop a go-to-market strategy around like educational resources and promoting in the right distribution kind of channels, and what kind of educational event strategy that you want to have both in person and virtually, or at all different levels to make sure that you're getting in front of the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context. So they see members of your client-facing teams as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with energy storage, specifically sodium-ion battery technology. So as you go through that process and figure out what you're going to do to be the Wikipedia of anything and everything having to do with energy storage for these kinds of companies, and to have amazing blogs and articles and email newsletters and social posts and webinars and offline webinars like breakfast seminars and lunch and learns and symposias and workshops and tours and all of the things that are going to help ensure that you're with those prospects and those clients throughout their full buyer's journey, not just the final 17% when they're ready for vendor contact, but the full 100%. So you have a chance to really shape the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different alternatives that are in front of them. So you ensure that you have a very strong place in as many of those 28 touch points as possible between complete stranger and purchase decision. Once you have nailed that and rolled that into your go-to-market strategy, you're going to almost certainly find that the process of going through that will continue to fuel new learnings. You'll discover additional buyer personas and sub-buyer personas, segments within the segments. You'll discover negative buyer personas when a certain kind of stakeholder shows up. That's like the kiss of death to kill the deal. You'll discover all these things along the ways. You may discover certain kinds of channel partnerships that are great buyer personas that you also want to build a go-to-market strategy around. But all of this is very iterative in nature. I always tell people when it comes to building your go-to-market, your GTM strategy, this isn't something you're going to build once and laminate it and put it under a museum glass and admire it for years. Now, this is something that you're going to build and you're going to run campaigns against, and you're going to learn from those campaigns and look at the data, both qualitative and quantitative and anecdotal, and you're going to figure out what's working so you can do a lot more of that, and what's not working so you can do a lot less of that. So we'll, by nature, get stronger over time. But it's not static, because not only are you always learning, your product roadmap when it comes to energy storage and sodium-ion battery technology will most likely be continuing to evolve in response to industry challenges and industry changes and new competitors, direct competitors and indirect competitors and non-business model competitors that are entering the field. So this is your go-to-market, your GTM is a living, breathing organism. And it needs to be treated like that. And that's why it's so important to have a great alignment across your team. And the smaller your team is, the more critical it is that you recruit people that are comfortable wearing a lot of different hats, or taking on a lot of different roles. Because for a relatively small company that's relatively early on, your account executives many times are going to get fantastic innovation and product ideas that need to be fed back into your product person, your technical co-founder, whoever it is that's in charge of your product roadmap, because they're going to come to you and say, like, there's 3 deals that are sitting in the deals board. There's $1.5 million in pipeline that's sitting there that I can't close because we don't have this feature, or we don't have this certification. When are we going to get it? And if you don't have people on your team that are used to working in situations of extreme uncertainty, that have spent significant amount of times in startups, they can be like deer in headlights when it comes to selling in a environment where there's not an established brand and there's not strong go-to-market fit or even product market fit. Product market fit means you know exactly who they are, who the exact clients are, the products and services they purchase, the price points at which they purchase, the frequency at which they repurchase, all the standard unit economics. Go-to-market fit is the next level above product market fit, where if you continue to add new capital, infuse new investments into your business, that you'll be highly confident that everything will continue to scale without the wheels falling off. So those are some really important considerations when it comes to creating a go-to-market strategy for energy storage and sodium-ion battery technology. But like at a high level, it really comes down to understanding that in a self-driven buyer's journey, we need to show up in a way that we're welcomed in, as opposed to being seen as someone who's just constantly nagging them and begging them for initial meeting. So in order to do that, they really need to see you and your client-facing team as the definitive experts for this particular kind of company, in this particular kind of geographic region, for this particular kind of size, so that these interactions feel like they're getting free consulting. Because when your AEs, your account executives, and your sales development reps are able to have that kind of vibe with your prospects and clients, it is game changing, because then now all of a sudden your prospects and clients actually want to spend time with members of your client-facing team as opposed to the other way around where there's chasing. So it completely changes the dynamics of the relationship and really positions yourself going forward to be seen as a significant force, as a definitive leader in the space when it comes to your go-to-market strategy being successful for a company that is in the business of energy storage with sodium-ion battery technology. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back with the additional 3 questions that we'll be addressing for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of go-to-market sales and marketing professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And if you're getting great value from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show, make sure that you hit the like button wherever you're watching, and feel free to add a comment as well if you have an idea for another topic or another question that you'd like us to address in an upcoming episode of the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream. So next up, how can a sustainable data center solutions provider avoid spam filters when doing lead generation? How does a sustainable data center solutions provider avoid spam filters when doing lead generation? That's a really interesting one, because generally companies that see sustainability as a big part of their market positioning and a big part of their branding like to be doing socially responsible things most of the time, hopefully all of the time, but at least most of the time. So the question is, under what scenario are we worried about our outbound email lead generation tripping spam filters if we're generally doing things that are socially responsible, that are aligned with our sustainable brand and positioning that we're doing for our data center prospects and clients? So the best way, if you're doing a lot of outbound emails as part of your lead generation, is to get serious about showing up in a way that actually adds value and educates and builds trust with your prospects and clients before you're pushing them for a sales meeting. The biggest mistake that I see being made when it comes to outbound lead generation, and this is nothing new in the last year or two, this is something that's been a problem for 5 or 10 years, but it's become a bigger issue now because a lot of teams are using AI-driven outbound sales prospecting tools that are trying to have a piece of SaaS, a software as a service, like marketing technology, sales technology, do the work of what used to be done by a human sales development rep. And when there's not a lot of thought being given to relevance and value before you ask for something in return, yeah, there is a really good chance that you're irking a lot of your prospects to the point where some of them are hitting the spam button. And that's not good, because it doesn't take a lot for all of a sudden, not only are your outbound emails not getting through, but any messages that you send from the same email domain name, which could be your client, much more important kinds of with your existing client base, those messages aren't getting through either. So when you're trying to send onboarding messages and customer marketing and customer expansion and just updates on what's going on within your company, that's part of the reason why people sometimes have multiple domains and they play in games with warming up domains and things like that. But there's a way to largely avoid most of this, because I think what causes a lot of prospects and clients to disregard your emails and get actually annoyed enough that they want to not only ignore it, but penalize you for even trying, is it starts with understanding, having a really tight grasp on your ideal client profile and your buyer personas and who they are, empathizing with who they are, what they're struggling with the most, what they're trying to achieve, and figuring out ways that you can show up in a way that adds value to their professional lives, as opposed to demanding that they book a meeting or a sales appointment or something like that. A lot of, at the risk of oversimplifying, it's kind of like in a relationship. Imagine that you meet someone of a romantic interest and you go out on a first date, and you think towards the middle or the end of the first date, you're like, it's going well, so should we just get married already? You'd be like, what? It's our first date. We're just meeting each other. We just met like an hour ago, and you want to get married? What the hell are you talking about? Get the heck out of here, creep. And it may be amusing if you were watching a romantic comedy with like Ashton Kutcher or Cameron Diaz or Mila Kunis or Justin Timberlake or something like that. But in real life, it generally doesn't work like that. Most people that find their soulmates and get married and have successful marriages that last for decades, they date for a while, and they get to know each other, and they get to know each other's friends and families, and they go through multiple seasons together, and then they get engaged, and they're engaged for a while, and then they get married. It's very, very rare for people to propose marriage on a first date and have that actually work out well. What happens a lot of times with outbound prospecting is people think that a complete stranger is going to be so jaw-droppingly wowed by what's in your subject line and what's in your message that they're going to drop everything and forget about the fact that they've never heard of you and never heard of your company. And yeah, sure, I'm going to spend a half hour educating you about my goals and problems when I have no idea who the heck you are and why I should even care. What's a lot more realistic, as opposed to proposing marriage on the first date, is to recognize that there's a couple of things going on with the way people research and make purchase decisions for anything and everything having to do with data centers. 10 years ago, for a data center solutions provider, your prospects and clients would typically get about halfway through their buyer's journey before they'd be ready for vendor contact and sales contact. At the time, CEB, the corporate executive board that's now part of Gartner, did some research with Salesforce and SiriusDecisions and found that about 56% of a typical buyer's journey was over before sales contact, vendor contact. Fast forward 10 years of digital transformation, a lot of baby boomers retiring, a lot more millennials and Gen Zs being in decision-making kind of roles, millions of people working from home at the beginning of the 2020s. And we're now in a place where it's not 56% of the journey is over before sales contact. Now it's 83% of the buyer's journey is over before sales contact. 83%. This has a massive, massive impact for how to approach your lead generation. What this means is we need to really understand the 28 touch points, the complete buyer's journey that someone's going through between complete stranger and purchase decision, better than we have ever understood that before. So as a data center solutions provider, get really tight on who your ideal client profile is, where they're located, what company size, what industries they're located in. And then within that ideal client profile, sure, you can build a targeted account list, an ABM, account-based marketing. That'll help to decide what companies you're going to do this outbound lead generation with. But we need to get more specific than that. We need to understand who are the key people within these companies, the buyer personas, the most important stakeholders that are going to be on the decision committee. And most importantly, after we've prioritized so we end up with a primary buyer persona and a secondary buyer persona, we need to look at each of those segments separately and figure out what's the consensus on their biggest goals and challenges when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center solutions. And we can't just guess about what those biggest goals and challenges are. We need to actually do the research, either face-to-face or on video calls or studying their LinkedIn profiles or doing surveys or looking in the CRM at your call notes or all of the above. But we need to get consensus on their own words from their own mouths, not what we think those words are, but what those words actually are, because that's going to be what powers our subject line. That's going to be what goes in the outbound email message. That's what's going to be in the landing page headline that offers some value to them throughout the full buyer's journey. And that's a big thing to keep in mind as well, is now that we have this self-driven buyer's journey where people are incredibly allergic to spending time with members of your sales team until they're almost ready to purchase, we need to figure out a way to get in there when we still have the opportunity to educate and build trust and shape the way that they look at anything and everything having to do with data center solutions. And the way we do that is, in most cases, you need a radical makeover of your client-facing team. Account executives, AEs, sales developments, SDRs. I'm not saying you should immediately go into the email signature job title and the LinkedIn profile job title and the job title that's on the business cards and come up with a better synonym. It's a much bigger issue than that. These are cultural changes for a lot of companies, is having your client-facing team members show up in a way that actually is incredibly useful and valuable to your prospects and clients. So your prospects and clients actually want to spend time with members of your client-facing team, so they actually don't have to work so hard with nagging them, pestering them with these outbound lead generation messages that cause people to get so annoyed that they hit the spam button. So in most cases, for a complete stranger, so this doesn't turn into a cheesy Justin Timberlake, Ashton Kutcher romantic comedy, we need to wine and dine them first. And the way we wine and dine them is we need to build a relationship with most of these prospects and clients when they're still in the awareness and the consideration stages of the journey. When they know that there's a big goal that they're trying to figure out, when they know there's a big struggle or a big challenge that's driving them nuts, and they're open to approaches on how to close that gap and achieve that goal, or how to address that nagging challenge. They're not interested in hearing about how wonderful your company is and what your products and services are. They'll might be open to that a few weeks or a few months down the road. But right now, we just need to educate and build trust. And the way we do that, extreme empathy for who they are, what they're trying to figure out professionally for themselves, for their teams, for their companies, and what's driving them nuts. Tactically, what does that look like? Great segmentation, great email marketing to people that have converted on a landing page on your website where there's some kind of know, like, and trust already, and spending a lot of time with them throughout their full journey. Most data center solutions providers that are doing this well have invested aggressively not only in creating educational resources, but educational events where your prospects and clients want to attend and want to spend time because they're learning so much from you and your client-facing team members. These educational events could be virtual, like what you're watching right now, a live stream or a webinar. These can be in person, like the offline version of that, where you have a breakfast seminar or a lunch and learn or a half-day workshop or a symposium or something that's in your training classroom or in your conference room or something where you have a chance to really teach them some very, very useful insights about what's going on in the industry, how other people in similar companies in similar kinds of roles in your geographic region, a company size, how they are navigating these exact kinds of challenges to grow their companies better. In some cases, you may want to pull in some of your existing clients as speakers, as panelists, either virtually or in person. That helps because people can relate to that. Your prospects and clients can relate perhaps to your satisfied clients or channel partners even better than they can relate to you. And it's a form of social proof. But at the end of the day, avoiding the spam filters around lead generation is becoming really self-aware of why people are getting annoyed. They're getting annoyed because you're not adding value. You're not showing up how they want you to show up. If you're hosting an educational event that's incredibly useful for this particular kind of stakeholder in this particular kind of company, you're actually doing them a service to reach out with an outbound to make them aware of that educational event, of that webinar, and invite them. You're not pushing for a sales meeting. All you're trying to say is, hey, if you're like most CTOs of manufacturing company, mid-sized manufacturing companies in our area, you're likely struggling with this challenge, and that challenge. And that's the reason why we're hosting a breakfast seminar next month just for CTOs of mid-market manufacturing companies, where we'll be exploring some of these big issues and some of these biggest challenges. We'll include, we have a couple of speakers. They'll be sharing data on what's going on and what best practices look like. And we'll give a brief demo and have a chance to get some of your biggest questions answered. And it's so hyper specific for who they are and what they care about that it's like literally grabbing them by the virtual shirt collars as they scroll by. And it's like almost impossible to ignore because it's so specific to who they are and what they care about and what's driving them nuts, what their biggest goals are. Reach them where they are right now, not where you want them to be in a couple of weeks or a couple of months when they're further along in their buyer's journey or sales cycle, but where they actually are. And when you do that well, they're going to want to spend time with you and members of your sales team. And when they want to spend time with members of your sales team, it's a completely different shift in context, to the point where you can have an active role in a lot of those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. And it also makes super obvious for what your lead generation emails should actually look like, depending on who they are and where they are in the journey. Obviously, if somebody has attended 3 or 4 of your educational events and they filled out the surveys and gotten tremendous value, of course, it's time to pass that lead to someone on your account executive team to find out what they're actually looking for and how you may be able to help. If you do this the right way, if it's an in-person event, more than likely there's members of your sales team that will even be in the room that can potentially talk. But again, it's a very delicate balancing act, tightrope act to walk between making sure that you're delivering outrageously high levels of value before you're asking for things in return, before you're asking for attention in return, before you're asking to meet the rest of the decision committee. So for a sustainable data center solutions provider that's all about social responsibility, part of that social responsibility probably is making sure that you're having a delightful prospect and opportunity and customer experience. And in order to do that, we need to deliver a lot of value. If people are hitting the spam button, we're delivering the opposite of value. So the empathy, understanding what they care most about, figuring a way to show up with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context. So they see our client-facing team as teachers and consultants and trusted advisors and subject matter experts and thought leaders when it comes to anything and everything having to do with the kind of data center solutions that your company provides. That's the unlock with all of this. That's what's going to cause you to avoid the spam filters. But more importantly, spam filters are avoiding the spam filters are defensive. We want to be proactive with all of this and deliver such outrageously high levels of value that you almost never have problems with email deliverability. When I look at what our company's email deliverability looks like, when I go into like HubSpot, it's always 99% plus. Every once in a while, it'll dip into like the mid to high 98% range, because we take the time to only have people getting emails that want to be getting the emails. There's good segmentation, there's good personalization. We're adding a lot of value. So my challenge for you is, if you really see your company as a sustainable data center solutions provider, make sure that your marketing, your sales, your go-to-market, your lead generation playbook is very consistent with that same level of sustainability and social responsibility. Next question up is, how do we close data center sales with ICT clients, information communications technology clients? How do we close data center sales with ICT clients? So we want to make sure, if you're trying to increase your close rate, that we know exactly who these people are and where they are in their buyer's journey, where they are in their life cycle stage. So we need to segment based on a buyer persona, who the individual is, and we need to segment based on where they are in their relationship with your company, or in their journey, their stage. And if we're approaching this the right way, we should be using that information to power everything that we're doing with our go-to-market strategy, with our sales enablement strategy, with our content marketing, with our thought leadership strategy, in terms of what we're creating and who we're promoting it to, who we're distributing this to. Because when I see close, what that more than likely means is that there's a lot of sales opportunities that are sitting in your pipeline, that are sitting on your deals board, that just aren't progressing. So the question is, why aren't they progressing? There's really 2 parts to this. In terms of sales enablement, in terms of like a sales management approach, how granular are your deal stages? In other words, is there granularity in your deal stages? Are there different, in HubSpot, for example, you set up a deal stage and you set up a probability of close based on where they are at that deal stage. In other words, as they advance throughout different levels of opportunity, throughout levels of deal, they go from anywhere to a 10% close, 20% close, 80% likely to close, 90% likely to close, whatever it is. And that's going to be individual to your company and your buyer personas and the journey that they go through. Typically, in order to advance someone to the next stage, it should be because that prospect, that opportunity took a certain action. Not that you took an action, but they took an action that increased your confidence that they could be upgraded, that their percentage of likelihood to close could actually be upgraded. So it's user driven, it's inspectable, and it's something that makes sense to helping them accelerate the next step in the journey. A lot of people going forward, when it comes to how to be a successful enterprise account executive, see a big part of their job as being a project manager for helping your internal champion get alignment throughout the company with all the different stakeholders that are involved. So from an early buyer's journey, from awareness and consideration stage, yes, it can be a really good idea to get tight on your ideal client profile and your buyer personas and to try to get as many people as possible on the decision committee, consuming your thought leadership content and attending your educational events and getting indoctrinated about how you recommend that they research and compare options and evaluate pricing, how they navigate that full journey. That's in the awareness and the consideration stages. At the decision stage, where that lead has been advanced to an opportunity, and you're now tracking a much more granular deal stage, then we need to understand what's worked best for other similar kinds of prospects. What are the stages that someone's going to go through based on their behavior that gives you confidence that they're progressing in the right direction? But a lot of the mindset of how likely it is that they're going to close starts much, much earlier on in the journey. It starts with getting super clear about who they are and what they care about, how good a job you've done of educating and building trust in the early and the middle stages, how tight that prospect is, how the opportunity is to your bullseye in terms of product market fit and go-to-market fit. You know, product market fit by definition is being really tight on exactly who they are, exactly the product services that they are going to buy, at what price points and how often. When you start deviating significantly from that ideal client profile, from your target buyer personas, of course, you're going to have unpredictable results. When you get to go-to-market fit, that's having such extreme confidence in your product market fit that you know that when you add another $1 million, $5 million, $10 million in resource investment, whatever it is to all of this, that it's going to continue to scale reasonably well and that the wheels are not going to totally fall off. From a practical standpoint, for closing more of these data center sales with ICT clients, so a lot of setting the stage for this happening smoothly starts much earlier on in the journey. Being really clear about what kinds of companies and what kinds of individuals within those companies need to be involved in those kinds of conversations. So your ICP, your ideal client profile, geography, size, business model, and the buyer personas that you're prioritizing that are on the decision committee, and how you're engaging with them to add value to their professional lives. That's setting the stage so that your company stays on the short list and that they want to spend time with members of your client-facing team. From a tactical perspective, lead generation on a tightly themed landing page that's offering a lot of value for what's on the other side of the landing page, good, solid, highly segmented, highly personalized email marketing, outrageously valuable educational events, both virtually and in person. All of those set the stage for making it easier for your opportunities to progress through the deals board, to progress through the different stages, so they close. So you can close more data center sales with your ICT clients. The reality is a typical client will go through like 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. How many of those touch points does your company own? You may think you're spending a lot of time with that prospect, but the reality is there's a chance you aren't. So what can you do to level up and spend more time with those prospects in a way that adds value to their professional lives, that adds value to their team's professional life, that adds value to them understanding exactly how they should approach what they're doing, their biggest data center related goals, their biggest data center related stressors and challenges, and how you can help them see the potential for a better state based on strong understanding, strong pattern recognition of having worked with other similar kinds of stakeholders and other similar kinds of companies. That's where case studies, that's where panels, them getting to, in addition to you bringing together these great educational events, leveling up to the next level is bringing in some of your happiest clients and having them learn from others that are similar to theirs, that are similar to that exact kind of buyer persona. All that sets the stage for closing more data center sales with ICT clients. There's a mindset that needs to be in place with this as well. That's getting out of the vendor box. What does the vendor box mean? This is where your prospects and clients see your company as a commodity provider as opposed to true experts. And it's like night and day, the quality of the relationship that your marketing and sales and account managers and product and channel partner managers are going to have with a prospect or client that sees your company as the definitive go-to experts in your space, as opposed to a commodity broker. So for a lot of business models that are intermediaries, it's more important than ever for you to be super proactive about building up your expertise and showing up in a way that feels a lot more like interactions with a big four consultants and a lot less like spending time with an account executive or sales development role that is focused on advancing a lead throughout deal stages and to get an opportunity to closed won, WON. So all of that is what I would take into account for a company that's struggling with closing more data center sales with ICT clients, is leaning into the idea that it's a self-driven buyer's journey. They're going to be 83% of the way through the journey before they're open to meeting with someone from your sales team. And the way we get you back in there to have an active role in that first 83% as opposed to just the final 17% is getting you to show up in a way that exudes a tremendous amount of expertise. So they see you and your client-facing team members as consultants, as teachers, as trusted advisors. Trust is incredibly important. Educating and trust is a huge part of the reason to make these investments. And that's what gets you to close data center sales with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so you don't have to compromise on what's most important to that client's long-term interests and most important to your company's long-term interest for hitting your growth goals as well. And that brings us to our final question for this week's Data Center Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream. If you want to make sure that you're notified about upcoming events like this and upcoming educational resources, make sure you subscribe to our Data Center Sales and Marketing email newsletter that gets delivered to your email inbox on Sundays. You can subscribe directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So that brings us to our final question, which is, how do we sell green data centers to banking, healthcare, manufacturing, and telecommunications clients? How do we sell green data centers to banking, healthcare, manufacturing, and telecommunications clients? That's a terrific question. Why is that a terrific question? It's not just that green data centers are such a hot area right now. No pun intended with any of that. There's strong demand around sustainability. There's all kinds of directives going on in Europe right now. There's massive grid power supply constraints globally, in the US especially, but yeah, globally. So sustainable data centers, green data centers, heat reuse, decentralized data centers, all of these are getting a lot of attention right now for good reason. So the question is, when it comes to prospects and clients in banking, healthcare, manufacturing, and telecommunications, are there enough commonalities that we can use the exact same go-to-market playbook, the exact same sales and marketing strategy across all four of those verticals? Or would we do better by divide and conquer? I think for most companies, regardless of whether you're a relatively small company with a couple dozen employees or less, like startup kind of size, or whether you're a huge company, I think with the amount of globalization and hyper competition out there, I think nearly all companies that are selling green data centers, if they have four different vertical markets, need to have four different ways of going to market, GTM strategies and sales and marketing playbooks. Why is this important? Because within those hyper competitive spaces, your most important prospects and clients need to have a reason to want to prioritize working with your company. And they need to have a reason to want to spend time with members of your client-facing team. And with the availability of information today that's only been accelerated like crazy in the last couple of years, because Siri is not bleeding edge anymore. Alexa is not bleeding edge anymore. Google is not. None of these are bleeding edge. Even stuff like Copilot, Perplexity, Gemini, Claude. These large language model tools have given people the ability to get immediate access to all kinds of instant information in ways that kind of make search engine optimization and search engine marketing look kind of legacy to a certain degree. It's all still super important. But the reality is, in order for you to reach the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, it's crucial for you to show up as a teacher, as a consultant, as a trusted advisor, as a subject matter expert, perhaps even as a thought leader that's unique to that kind of business. Because that's one of the first ways for you to neutralize a lot of competition, is to have that expertise in dealing with that kind of business. So in a self-driven buyer's journey, where our brand is way more than just our logo and our hexadecimal colors and our fonts and our brand guide. Our brand is now everything that the marketplace says about us when we're not in the room. We need to be very realistic that we're really not in the room for much anymore by default. 10 years ago, you were in the room about half of the time. 56% of the buyer's journey typically took place before vendor contact or sales contact. So you had 44% of the journey still sitting with you when a prospecting client was finally ready to meet with someone from your sales team. Add in 10 years of digital transformation, generational changes, millions of people working from home during the early 2020s. We're now in a place where 83% of a typical journey is over before vendor contact, before sales contact, before someone's open to taking a meeting with someone from your sales team. And the only way we're going to get back in there is those prospects and clients that we care the most about in banking, healthcare, manufacturing, and telecommunications need to see members of our team as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with selling green data centers. So I would say almost immediately out of the gate, of course, you need a separate page on your website for each of those 4 vertical markets. And of course, you need a awareness and consideration stage downloadable premium content offer for each of those 4 kinds of vertical markets. That's table stakes. That was table stakes 10 years ago. So yeah, of course, the Who We Help 4 different pages. Of course, 4 different boxes on your website. Of course, 4 different kinds of downloadable guides and comparison guides and ebooks and whatever else you're doing with lead generation and lead nurturing. Good, but it goes way beyond that. In most cases, if you're going to do this the right way, you more than likely want a different account executive for each of those 4 verticals. So what that tells me is if your company is big enough to have dozens of account executives and sales development reps, you're in great shape. And it's just this deciding how you want to allocate resources and which gets overweighted, which gets underweighted. If you're a relatively small company, there's a lot to be said for a dedicated account executive to each of those 4. And that's exactly how it's playing out in the digital infrastructure industry. The reason why that's important is that account executive needs to have extreme specialization in that particular vertical at the intersection of green data centers. In a perfect world, they should also bring a resume. They should bring a LinkedIn profile that's loaded with industry experience of them knowing that space and them already having a lot of hundreds or thousands of first degree connections and already knowing the conferences and the industries and the publications and the groups and the hashtags that are top of mind for a data center related decision maker in banking and healthcare and manufacturing and telecommunications. And of course, different social posts. And of course, different email marketing campaigns and different webinars and different events. Yeah, that's how I would approach marketing and selling green data centers to banking, healthcare, manufacturing, and telecommunications. It may be that it's a single ideal client profile. You say, okay, they're more than likely going to be in this geographic region. They're going to be at least this big, but not this big. You have a range in terms of headcount, and there's 4 different verticals. But once you get into those 4 different verticals, there's a really good chance that you're going to need 4 different primary buyer personas and going to want to split up your traffic generation, your lead generation, your segmentation, your personalization, your sales cycle acceleration, your events, and most of all, the client-facing person or persons that are unique to that particular vertical, to that particular industry, because they need to show up in such a way that they're seen as the definitive go-to expert on anything and everything having to do with green data centers that's unique to a company in banking, healthcare, manufacturing, or telecommunications. And if you're thinking that one person can wear all of those hats, that's like going to the dentist and, oh yeah, by the way, while you're here for a root canal, I can also help you with your cat or dog. And, oh, I can also do an electrocardiogram. And, oh, you're having problems with your feet? Yep, I'm a podiatrist too. And, oh, yeah, by the way, while you're here, I also do car detailing on the weekend. You'd be like, is this person for real? The specialization that's needed to be competitive in the globalized, hyper-competitive world that we live in is more important than it's ever been. People are more sales allergic than they've ever been. It's more important than ever for you to show up as the teacher, the consultant, the trusted advisor, the subject matter expert, and the thought leader. In order to do that properly, it's incredibly important to hyper specialize. And again, that's why you see companies at all different sizes that want to approach 4 different verticals, having a separate sales team, having a minimum of a separate salesperson, a separate account executive for each of these most important prioritized verticals. And like I mentioned before, the minimum price of entry on all of this is, of course, you need a separate part of your website for each of these. And of course, you need separate lead generation offers and separate webinars and separate segmented email campaigns and separate conference investments and a separate strategy overall, because there's different learnings that are going to come up. Almost certainly there's going to be things that are unique to green data centers at the intersection of each of these verticals, because they're going to have different compliance requirements. That's a huge issue that will come up with your chief product officer or product manager, whoever wears that hat of your product roadmap strategy and where you invest in compliance and certifications and professional development of your own team members and best practices around being able to nail that. It's all related. But really, to be realistic about selling green data centers, and when I hear selling the actual data center, this sounds to me like someone's a developer doing like design and build work, or they sell wholesale capacity like build to suit, or they're selling shell at some level. They're more than likely, the way they phrased it, they're not selling co-location. They're probably not selling edge. They might be selling modular, probably not. If they're focused on, again, selling green has a different definition to everyone. We know in the space that there's a ugly term, greenwashing, that shouldn't have to exist, but it does exist because everyone has a very subjective definition of what a green data center actually is. But putting that aside, in order to educate and build trust and cut through the noise, to cut through the clutter in a way that's meaningful to help you market and sell and deliver green data centers to these 4 segments, you really need to segment up how you approach your marketing and sales and education and trust building so that it's unique to the most important buyer personas separately in each of those 4 kinds of segments, because for sure they have some things in common, but the stuff that's in common is not what's going to differentiate your company. And in order to win, unless you have a massive, massive global brand, the segmentation, the personalization, the differentiation becomes incredibly important. The social proof that's unique to that particular segment becomes extremely important. And the social proof will come into play in the middle and the later stages of the journey, in the consideration and decision stages of the journey. But the big message with all of this is understand that it's more difficult than ever to get to the right meetings with the right people. So much of the journey is happening without you. The way we show up early and often is we need to show up as teachers and consultants and trusted advisors, so our clients want to spend time with us. And in order to do that, in each of these 4 separate segments, by definition, you need subject matter experts within your company that bring expertise that are unique to the intersection of green data centers and each of those 4 vertical markets separately. They can't be the veterinarian who also does root canals, who also does cardiac surgery, who also does brain surgery, who also does mobile car detailing on the weekends. They need to be very focused on what they do best, being the definitive go-to expert when it comes to anything and everything having to do with green data centers unique to that particular part of the data center industry, more than likely anchored to your ideal client profile, a geographic region, a range of company size from a minimum company size to a maximum size company, minimum number of employees, maximum number of employees, where your company feels comfortable marketing, selling, and servicing, and then these industry specific, these vertical market concentrations that come up as well. So that's how I would approach selling green data centers to banking, healthcare, manufacturing, and telecommunications, one segment at a time. And that is the final question for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of go-to-market sales and marketing professionals within the growth of the data center industry. If you got great value from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure you hit the like button. If you have an idea for a question that we should address in an upcoming episode, feel free to drop that into the comments. And to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, make sure you subscribe to our Data Center Sales and Marketing email newsletter that comes to your inbox each Sunday at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Until next week, I wish you great success in growing your influence, your team's influence, and your company's influence within the data center ecosystem. It's a really, really exciting time. Look forward to seeing you back next week. Take care now.